Good morning.
Good morning.
So, every year, God helps me choose a one-word resolution, and this year's word was ready. So, you'd think I'd be ready for this, right? Not so much. When I was told to pray about sharing, I did. I prayed we would already have plans this weekend. We didn't. There's a reason I didn't want to share right now, but more on that later. I had an idyllic childhood, 2 loving parents. I was the youngest of 3 children, and we had a farm stuffed with cows, calves, and kittens. I grew up going to church twice on Sundays. Church was a big part of our family culture, but more importantly, my parents lived their faith all the other days of the week. I asked Jesus into my heart when I was 7 years old and quickly became the poster child for church. I invited friends, went to church camp, memorized verses, and I always won that game of who can find the Bible verse the fastest. Then, in high school, my faith started to rub against what I viewed as freedom. Following Jesus was less simple than it had been as a child. I made some not-so-great choices and did some not-so-great things. This continued in college, and I felt a lot of guilt. I still went to church, but instead of walking on the path I had started on with so much enthusiasm, I tried to walk parallel to it, staying just close enough so as not to reject my faith, but not so close that I was consumed by guilt. Shortly after graduating from college, I married my high school sweetheart, and after 2 years of marriage, we were ecstatic to find out we were expecting our first baby. I could not wait to be a mother. I started to panic, though, as I realized someone was going to have to teach this child about God, and there was so much I had yet to understand. I decided to get involved in a women's Bible study. It felt like I was finally walking on the path again instead of next to it. At our 12-week appointment, the doctor couldn't find our baby's heartbeat, and an ultrasound confirmed that we had miscarried. It was hard, but I felt God with me through it all. A few months later, a friend asked me about Jesus. He believed in God, but just didn't get why the whole Jesus piece was so important. All my years of Sunday school failed me in that moment, and I couldn't answer him. He talked about wanting to check out RCC, so I offered to go along and support. And God blew me away that day. Pastor Mike shared his faith story, and it was so similar to my friend's, it was unreal. It felt like the service had been custom designed just for him. We even sang his favorite song, Amazing Grace. Toward the end of the service, Mike showed a simple drawing. It was God on one side and us on the other with a big gap in between. He explained why Jesus mattered. Without him, we're separated from God. Then he showed the same picture with the cross bridging that gap. The exact question my friend and I needed answered. As he read a verse I had memorized as a child, it finally all clicked into focus for me. For this is how God loved the world. He gave his one and only Son, that everyone who believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. How had I missed it? It was so simple. I could hardly contain my excitement. I called my mom and dad to tell them all about the morning. The foundation they had so carefully poured during my childhood had led me to this moment of understanding. Jesus. It's all about Jesus. If he hadn't sacrificed his life for me, I couldn't have a relationship with God. I wasn't looking for a new church, but RCC felt like home, so I became a part of this family, was baptized, and God's been molding me ever since. So why didn't I want to share my story this morning? Because lately my soul has felt dry. I feel overwhelmed, irritable, and angry, and I have taken it out on the people closest to me. I struggle with a lot of anxiety when I think about the future. I have a chronic illness that requires infusions every 8 weeks. I worry that one day the medication will stop working. I worry about the side effects. I worry one of my children will end up with this. I dread the future more than I anticipate it, even knowing that God works everything for good. How could I stand up here and share when my attitude and actions haven't lined up with my faith lately? I honestly thought about saying no. But as I talked to a close friend about whether or not to share, she said, it's not always about getting a clear yes or no from God, but whether or not God gives you passion or inspiration for the thing he's calling you to. she also gently pushed me to get back into reading my Bible. I went home that day and started reading. I realized I'd been asking God to give me answers and then not staying still long enough to listen for his response. As I read, I was reminded to remember what God has already done for me. I went from dry to drenched within the week as I reflected on what God's done in my life. In the last year alone, God led me to a job that was perfect for me and allows me to have summers off with my children. I spoke at the Well Gather event, our awesome women's ministry, and even though public speaking typically has me feeling like a complete nervous wreck, I felt complete peace in the week leading up to it, and even while I was on stage. In an effort to do things that pushed me outside my comfort zone, I decided I wanted to play the drum on the worship team. A friend let me borrow her djembe drum, which I practiced for a couple months. I had just decided I would never have the courage to actually get up on stage and play. And that next Sunday, Pastor Adam jumped off the stage after service and asked me to try out. Being a part of the worship team, playing the drum, and now singing has given me so much joy. My illness, although not something I would ever choose, led me to quit my job and stay at home for 5 years with my children. 5 years I wouldn't trade for anything, even complete healing. Being sick and the struggle of it also led me to write about what God was teaching me at the time. God gave me a voice and the opportunity to share my faith in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise had. And the baby we lost, our miscarriage, I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but a birth still happened. You see, the month I first stepped foot in this church and finally understood my need for Jesus was the month that our baby was due. The birth didn't look as expected, but new life still happened because of the path that first pregnancy set me on, the path God set me on. When I remember what God has already done in my life, it's much easier to trust him with what's ahead. It's much easier to be ready.